Square Enix is officially set to appear at this year's E3 Game Expo. And with that announcement, there's a lot of buzz surrounding Final Fantasy XVI and whether or not Square Enix will reveal more details on the game. The last bit of information we received about Final Fantasy XVI was actually back in October of 2020 when the official website was launched. Since then, we received an interview with Final Fantasy XVI producer Yoshi P in February of this year. Before then, it was announced late last year that we will get more information on Final Fantasy XVI in 2021. Now 2021 has long since arrived and we are patiently waiting for Final Fantasy XVI news. This is where we cue in E3. There's no better time to reveal more FF16 news at the biggest game expo of the year. What better time to reveal more information on your biggest title yet? But there's always a possibility that Square Enix could decide to reserve any new information in favor for their own showcase events. And with many companies and studios launching their own streaming events and revealing titles on their own terms, Square Enix could even just use E3 for other titles not related to Final Fantasy XVI. However, Square Enix did have a showcase back in March, and they did not release any news on FF16, which now points to a huge possibility that we will get a Final Fantasy XVI showcase at this year's E3. And if reports are true that Final Fantasy XVI is farther in development than we think, then we could even get a release date as well. One thing is for certain is that Final Fantasy XVI will not be released by the end of 2021. Now, my personal observation and also just trying to understand Square Enix's business practices, it is not really wise to compete with your own AAA titles. And that is something Square Enix has never done. With Endwalker coming out by the fall of this year, it is very unwise to release Final Fantasy XVI around the holidays because it will compete with the launch of Endwalker, and if any of you know, Final Fantasy XIV is essentially Square Enix's moneymaker. Endwalker is also the last expansion to the Highland vs. Zodiac saga, which is finally closing the story that was launched since the initial release of A Realm Reborn in August 2013. That was almost 8 years ago. So with that said, Endwalker is pretty much the Olympics of Final Fantasy XIV as it plans to end an old saga so it can introduce a brand new one. Endwalker is like the final season of Breaking Bad, the last Harry Potter book, the episode 9 to Star Wars, the season 8 to Game of Thrones, the milk to your coffee and the sugar to your tea. With all of that said, there's absolutely no way Final Fantasy XVI will get a 2021 holiday release, and if it does, I will extremely be shocked by that. So when can we expect Final Fantasy XVI as we play this fun game of speculation? If I have to guess, I believe FF16 could either be released in fall of 2022 or even early 2023. So far this year, we have Final Fantasy VII Integrate coming out in June and Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker in the fall. Next year, we have Forspoken, which I believe is coming out in early 2022, if my assumptions are correct, which probably leaves room for Final Fantasy XVI in the fall or holidays of that year. 2023 will probably be lined up for Final Fantasy VII Part 2, with Final Fantasy XIV 7.0, the next expansion after Endwalker, launching that year as well. Though there's a possibility that Final Fantasy VII Part 2 could come out next year in 2022, which could leave Final Fantasy XVI in 2023 instead. Either or, there is a strong suggestion that we may get Final Fantasy XVI either next year or at least in 2023. If I have to make a definite guess, I strongly believe Final Fantasy XVI could be coming out next year in 2022 during the fall leading into next year's holiday season. That is all for today. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. You can also follow me on my social media. My Twitter handle is @SaintVirtual. Thanks for watching, peace out, and see you all next time.